Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 1. Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. One verse at the beginning of this, just mentioning that it is at this time that Samuel finally dies. That for all that he had done for the people of Israel, that time came to an end. And the Israelites gathered together and lament for him, for his passing. The Jews would normally sit Shiva for 7 days when a close relative died. And it could be that this is the gathering and lamenting, that this is a 7-day moment of mourning for Samuel. A man who was a judge over them, acted almost as a high priest over them. A man who was a prophet of the Lord, who had brought them victories, who had brought forth so much prosperity for the people in the land. Then they turned, said, "Give us a king." Through him comes a king. And I'm sure there's a good amount of people lamenting over the fact that they didn't just stick with Samuel. Some people lamenting the fact that they had ever asked for a king to begin with. But it's during this time that David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. He moves on. You know, we're not actually told whether or not David or Saul attended the funeral of Samuel. David may have stayed in hiding, or may have kind of slid into the funeral area. Maybe he went in to pay his respects in disguise, so the people wouldn't have known he was there. Samuel had said that he wanted nothing to do with Saul, so Saul may never have gone down to see Samuel at this time. We're not sure, but it is the end of an old man who gave his life for the Lord, who gave his life in such a way from the moment of his birth, dedicated to the work of the Lord. Spent his entire life doing the will of God. Not doing what was best for him, but was doing best for the Lord, his kingdom, and his people. And for that, an entire nation comes together and laments for him. Now, we don't all get to be Billy Grahams, where a nation comes to lament for us. We don't all get to be Samuels. But we should try to live like one. We should try to live in a way that people remember the Lord and lament our passing. Not because we were so great, but because the work we did was so great. The light we shined was so bright. It should very much be that way. And how amazing would it be if we all tried to live with that goal in mind? Not to be the great super pastor. Not for everyone to speak our name. But to lament our passing because of the good we did in God's name. Not every man of God has the entire nation stop and lament for him. People didn't want to lament over Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Isaiah. People didn't want to lament over the loss of Jesus. You didn't have the whole nation come to a standstill because Jesus died. They wanted to lie and obfuscate what happened with his death to begin with. But how great would it be to have our name attached to God in such a way as Samuel? To know that the people aren't lamenting just for his loss, just because he died, but lamenting because of what that loss meant with their own relationship with the Lord and the connection he had of God. That's the kind of life we want to live. Not to be remembered for what we accomplished, for what we did in life, for how much we gathered and gained, but to be remembered for how closely our walk was to him. How closely how bright our light shined for him. How many people looked to us and said, I see the Lord in that man. Now, how do I get to be like him? How do I get to use myself as a tool for God in that way, so that other people are inspired in the same way to look to God and to seek God? That's one thing we should pray about and look at. What do I need to do in my life to have my name so intertwined with the name of the Lord? Now there was a man in Maon, whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. So now we move to Maon, this region down by Paran. Different Carmel than the Carmel of Elijah. It's a different area. It's not the same mountain. But here's this man, all of these sheep, all these goats, shepherds, servants, a beautiful, smart, understanding wife. But here he is cruel. Churlish is what the King James used. Of the house of Caleb. So he's a Calebite. From Judah. From the house of Caleb. So you remember Caleb, strong-willed in God, powerful, loyal, and then you see his descendant, not quite the same. Some have also surmised that this line, he was of the house of Caleb, because Caleb can also mean something along the lines of dog, was that he was doggish and dirty. I don't know about that one personally. I see it more just as a juxtaposition of the way this man is versus the way Caleb was. Caleb, a man we should all wish to be like. And Nabal, a man who we should wish to be the exact opposite of. When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say to him who lives in prosperity, Peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have." So, David, we'll get to why he would send these young men. But he's saying, hey, look, Nabal's up there. He's prosperous. He's now shearing his sheep. It's getting ready for this feast time. Go up and go greet him. Go greet him on my behalf. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while we were in Carmel, or they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. So that's why he's making the request. David and his men, while they were down there, have kept Nabal's shepherds and flocks completely safe. As we've read before, Philistines send out raiders. Amalekites send out raiders. They try to pick off, steal, rustle cattle, so to speak, bring forth things, slaughter people, attack villages. But not when David's around. Not when him and his mighty men are around. Nabal's young men have had nothing to worry about. There have been no issues now. None whatsoever. And he's saying, you tell Nabal that he can ask his young men. He can ask his shepherds. Not a single thing happened while they were in the wilderness because we were there to help protect them. So just say, hey, look, it's a feast time. You're shearing your sheep. You're going to slaughter some. Whatever comes to hand some to your servants. Like, give us a little bit to compensate us for the protection we gave your people. So when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David, and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is this David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him all these words. So here is his wicked and evil nature. Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? You know very well who he is. And then the insult of there are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Calling David a traitor to Saul and basically a runaway slave. Saying that David ran and turned against Saul. He knows clearly who David is. It's not this, who is David? I've never heard of this man. But who does he think he is? This traitor to the king? He thinks I'm going to give my bread, my water, and my meat to him? When I don't even know where you're from? Who are you to ask these things of me? And of course we know why. Because he helped protect your young men, your shepherds. He protected you in your time of need. But now instead of honoring the hospitality of the time and culture, you're going to send them away empty-handed. You're going to insult him on top of it. And you're going to pretend that you don't know. You're going to insult the man, call him a runaway slave, send his people back without acknowledging what they did to help you in your time of need. And that is the way of our world. That is the materialism we live upon in our world now. The way people will only look at who are you and what have you done for me lately? Why should I honor this agreement for you? What have you done for me? Did I ask you to protect my shepherds? I mean, David could have easily just overran the shepherds and stole things for himself. But that wasn't the way of David. This is a man who is not willing to take from his own flocks, who is not willing to share with his neighbor, who is not living upon or living up to the law of Moses that was given to him, and being nasty to boot. Then David said to his men, every man gird on his sword. So every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. So David is ready to return insult with injury. So not only is he not neighborly, not only is he not sharing or compensating David and his men for the work they did to protect his flocks, now he's going to insult him. And David is angered. And it's an interesting juxtaposition between the last chapter. David has the man who is oppressing him, the man who is hunting him like a dog, at his mercy, and he will not reach out a hand against the Lord's anointed. But this shepherd Nabal, this nasty old man, no, I'm not going to let him speak to me that way. Saul can throw a spear at my head. I will not raise my hand against him, let alone gird on a sword. But this man I'll slay. How dare this man speak this way about me and to my people, and withhold these things from me? It goes to show that David may be a man after God's own heart. David may have acted very righteously in certain ways and at certain times, but was still just as fallen and flawed as everyone else. And when he sees this man, this doggish man, this wicked man Nabal, call him out and say these wicked things and insult him, that David's not willing to let that slide. David's not willing to turn the other cheek in that case. David's not willing to let that slide from someone who is beneath him, who is less powerful than him. And that is a failing. That is something that David falls a lot into. So often we'll see him, when it comes to Saul, able to avoid the temptations of his baser nature. But when it comes to other situations, he lets his passions override him. And this is one of those times. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us both by day and night, or night and day, all the time we were with them keeping the sheep. Now, therefore, know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his household. For he is such a scoundrel, and one cannot speak to him." So one of the young men, one of the shepherds, sees the issue between David's men and Nabal, and immediately goes to Abigail. We're told in the beginning, she is very understanding, she is very reasonable. She's a smart woman. She's an intelligent woman. She sees what's coming. The young men see what's coming. But as he mentions about Nabal, he's such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. He's unreasonable. Not only is he greedy and wicked, but he's unreasonable. You cannot move him from the position he is in. He is too stubborn. He doesn't understand the situation he is in, and he doesn't want to understand the situation he's in. He sees something he doesn't want to do, and that's it. He doesn't understand his place in the world or the situations he gets himself into. You just insulted one of the most feared people in the nation, as if you held power over him because you can yell insults with your mouth. Essentially, Nabal is letting his mouth cash a check his butt can't pay for, or mouth write a check his butt can't cash. I haven't heard that since the 80s, so that did come out a little weird. But you get the idea. But here is the shepherds, as David's young men who went up said, ask them, they will tell you the truth. So they go around Nabal and tell Abigail. They tell someone smarter, someone more reasonable. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisin, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, go on before me. See, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal, knowing that he's too stubborn. You can't speak to him. You can't reason with him. But look at what she's able to give. Look at the wealth they already have. They already have 5 sheep already dressed to be cooked. Or maybe that means cooked. I can't actually recall at the moment. But she has 5 sheep sheared and slaughtered and ready. You have 2 skins of wine. You have 200 loaves of bread, 200 cakes of figs, clusters of raisins. You have all these things ready to go. He has so much abundance that she takes this and he won't even notice. That's the greed of someone who looks to only the materialism of the world. That no matter how much they have, it's never enough and they're never willing to share. Because any loss is too much loss. Any happiness to be delivered to someone else somehow subtracts from your happiness. That's the way these people view this. But Abigail, smart enough to know what to do to try to appease David without letting her intransigent husband know. But it's interesting. Go on before me. See, I am coming after you. Very much as we saw with Jacob doing with his servants when he sent all the offerings out to Esau first. Take all these out first. I'll be coming after. That way Esau sees the provisions first and lightens his mood before I come to deliver a message and meet with him. So it was as she rode on the donkey that she went down under cover of the hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow in the wilderness, or has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. So this is David speaking to himself, basically, or venting his frustrations, that he protected him in vain, that he's not getting for his good, that he's not receiving for what he put out. And some people say, that's right, David. That's right. You should be getting something out of this. Look at all you did. Look at all you did for this man, and he's repaying you with nothing. But it's actually the wrong thing. When we give, we should be giving unto God, as if we were giving unto God. We shouldn't be looking for something in return. What we do for the benefit of others is not in vain. It's not empty, if we're doing it for the Lord. Since the time I was young, a small child, if you see someone begging on the street, you're told don't give them anything. They're a drunk. They're a drug addict. Don't give them money. They're just going to run out and get their next high. Don't give them anything. That's enabling them to live that way. But if you give them that, it'll be empty. It'll be in vain. Maybe. Possibly. I mean, I'm never going to see anything out of it. This person's never going to repay me at all, let alone repay me with evil. But maybe they will repay me with evil. Maybe I'll hand them food and they'll spit in my face. Maybe. But it's not in vain. It's not empty when you're doing it to the Lord. Abraham sees 3 travelers afar off. Says to make everything prepared. Kill a fatted calf. Make food. He doesn't know who these people are. They could have come in and slaughtered him and his family. He has no idea. They could have eaten his food and walked away and not said a word to him. Would it then be in vain? We know it isn't because they ended up being the messengers of the Lord and the Lord himself. A Christophany. But maybe they wouldn't have been. Wouldn't have made it in vain. I heard a story from a pastor once that kind of went a little bit like somebody had an old van that they wanted to donate to a church. Church is kind of small. Right? So they don't like, I go to Calvary Chapel, Philadelphia. It's a massive church. We have a lot there. Very godly, very biblical church. But it's a big church. This church, not so much. So the person wanted to donate this van. Now, after a week or so, the person starts seeing them using the van and gets angry and confronts the pastor. No, I don't want you using the van like that. I wanted the van used for activity A. You're using it for activity B. Why are you doing that? And in that man's mind, he's thinking, well, surely I gave this van to this church in vain because I wanted it to be here. But when you give up the van to the church, you're giving it unto God. For those people who you trust to teach you the word, who you trust with your children, who you trust with your offerings, which is what the van is, to do as the Lord commands them to do and what honors him most. You're trusting those people to do it. It is being given unto the Lord. So they use it for what they feel is best. It's not in vain. It's being used for a good purpose, just not the one you wished it to be. David protecting his people and his mighty men protecting these people is not in vain because they didn't get something out of it. The protecting them was what they got out of it. The honor and glory towards God is what came out of it. Now, is Nabal being wicked? Sure. Is he being greedy? Sure. But David right now has a very sinful mindset himself. As if this protection was to earn a favor, without there being an agreement made between them. That's an expectation he should never have had. Now, should it be repaid with kindness? Absolutely. But that's an expectation he didn't have a right to make, let alone enforce, which is what he's about to try to do. But the protection was never in vain. It was for the glory of the Lord. Although we sit here and say, David, you're right, man. This guy's doing you wrong. That's a fleshly response. That's a sinful response. That's not a godly response. If I'm stopped at a light and I see a homeless man there, I don't have any money. I have a bag of chips. I hand him the bag of chips. Was that in vain because he can't give me anything back? Is it in vain if he doesn't thank me? No. I hand him some nourishment and pray for him. And that's between me and God, and between him and God. Now will never be in vain. Doing as unto the Lord will never be in vain. Never. Don't convince yourself that anything you do unto the Lord is in vain. David may have been the greatest king Israel ever had, but he was far from perfect. And not everything he comes up with, whether our flesh enjoys it or not, does not make it right or godly. And this is not a godly thought. This is not a godly time in his life. This is a time where David is falling to the temptation of his flesh and his anger and his emotions. And that is not a good thing. It's sad to see him fall this way, and for a man who seeks after God's own heart to miss the point so badly, and by so much. Surely in vain I have protected this fellow, all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. Absolutely not. Because look at the example and light he shined upon the young men of Nabal. The young men who went to his wife Abigail and said, our wicked master is repaying this man for all the good he did. That light David shined on them affected them to speak up against their own master, to do what was right. That is not in vain. The example we set by what we do is not in vain, because what we do unto the Lord to further his kingdom and to glorify his name above all else. It's not about us. It is about him. But apparently I'm not going to finish this chapter this time. So that's where we're going to end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.